You're listening to 99.1 WQRT LP, and welcome to Radio Free Book Club for August 2024. I'm Ken Honeywell. I'm a writer and reader from Indianapolis, and this month we're talking about one of the big books of 2024 so far. It's Percival Everett's novel, James. James is a reimagining of one of the most famous works, not just of American literature, but world literature, Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. But the protagonist and the narrator of James is Jim, the runaway slave who accompanies Huck on those adventures. Percival Everett is really having a moment. The film American Fiction, based on his novel Erasure, was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, one for Best Adapted Screenplay by the director Cord Jefferson. It also won the Humor and Humanity Award at our very own Heartland Film Festival. James has already been longlisted for the 2024 Booker Prize. I'm sure we're going to have a rousing discussion about it. So let's see who's in the Radio Free Book Club clubhouse this month. We actually have a couple of new club members here, and I can't wait for them to introduce themselves. And now's the time. Hello there, new club member number 1.
Hi, I'm Tim Taylor. Part-time writer, part-time lots of other things, and a huge fan of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, and glad to be here to discuss.
Yeah, glad you're here. I had a feeling Tim and I do some writing together almost every week, and I just had a feeling Tim was a Huckleberry Finn guy, and sure enough, he was.
They've got, right here.
Yeah. Wow. Hello, new club member number 2.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Sarah Layden, and I'm a writer and a teacher here in town. Most recently, the author of the book Imagine Your Life Like This, which is a short story collection.
Yeah.
And I teach creative writing at IU Indianapolis.
Yeah. If you have not read Sarah's book, it's really good. I'm a big fan.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for writing it. Hello. Now, this is a more seasoned club member here. Hello there, Christine.
Hello, Ken. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Hudson, based in Indianapolis, Indiana. I've lived here, grown up here. I actually just learned that Tim's daughter was my best friend in 4th grade. I knew she was my best friend, but I didn't. Anyways.
It's a great discussion already.
Exactly. Super happy to be back. Based in Indy, I work in advertising. I do a whole lot of reading. I used to do a whole lot of writing, and I wish I still did. And besides that, I like traveling and eating and like taking naps. So
yeah, are you going anywhere that speaks French?
I actually am going to Montreal in a couple of months to watch a pro cycling race. I'm very excited.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
cool.
exciting.
Sounds
Can't
really
wait.
cool.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Very nice.
All right, thanks for being here. And before we get going, I just also want to mention this is sort of our 2nd anniversary show. I say sort of because we were supposed to last month talk about Alice Munro's Hate Ship, Friendship, Courtship, Love Ship, Marriage. We were supposed to do it 2 days after the shocking revelations about her public life, and the feelings were just too raw for some of us to be able to have that discussion. So we're celebrating our birthday a month late, and I hope we get back to that Alice Munro discussion in some month to come, because I think it adds a different dimension to what are undeniably some amazing stories. I don't know, maybe we'll have someone on the show who would deny it. That would be fun as well. And one more note, you may know Huckleberry Finn, but James is not exactly Jim, and we will be spoiling this book. So if you're planning to read James, please, you might want to come back and listen at another time, which is easy because you can find this and all the episodes of Radio Free Book Club just about anywhere you stream podcasts. So go listen to another great WQRT show. Come back as soon as you finish the book and let us know what you think. So let's talk. Christine, expert book summarizer. What is James about?
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, no pressure. James is a novel about an enslaved person named Jim, more or less. That's a whole other story. And essentially what happens is Jim finds out that he's going to be sold to a different slave owner at a different plantation, and he does not want to be separated from his wife and daughter. So he runs away to an island that's sort of adjacent to the plantation, figuring that if he's not there, they can't sell him. While he's on this island, he runs into Huckleberry Finn, who is escaping his abusive alcoholic father, who's pretty terrible. And the two of them, Jim being a fugitive, of course, end up on the run together on the Mississippi River, where they have a lot of interactions with a whole cast of characters, archetypes, really, at this point. And in all of their wandering and searching along the river, they actually end up back where they started. And in doing so, they have this, like, sort of huge revelation about their identity on their own, their identity together, and sort of who they are and why they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
This is why we ask you, Christine.
That was excellent.
Exactly.
That was really good.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
So let's first just spend a couple of minutes talking about Huckleberry Finn. What's anyone's relationship with Huckleberry Finn? Tim?
Tim's
You-
book,
you-
I want
I'm
to note
You
that
can
Tim's
start
book
off.
does not even have a cover.
It
I
doesn't.
didn't know what that book was, actually.
It lives on my nightstand, and yeah, I don't know how many times I've read it. 10 times. I don't know how many times I've read Huckleberry Finn, but it is a constant companion and a comfort read.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's to me, it's always been not so much about yeah. It's always been not so much. I just cleared my throat. If you're all wondering, I don't know what the heck happened there, but
was weird.
They do it electronically these days. It is not so much a boy's book, which Tom Sawyer was. It's kind of, it progresses beyond that, and it becomes a book, to me, so much about the American experience is why I can just come back to it again and again and again. And the writing is just out of this world. So it's always a friend.
Yeah. Yeah. Sarah, how about you?
I think that's so interesting that you bring up, the fact that it's not a boy's book, because I think growing up, I was never handed this book. I was never told, hey, you would like this, because I read all the time, constantly, always in the library, tons of books in my house growing up. And I never read the whole novel. I think I only read excerpts as assigned in school. And it's funny because we were talking about where we went to school, where we grew up earlier in the parking lot. And my sister and I went to different high schools. And I found a couple of copies of The Adventures of, oh my gosh, I was going to say Mark Twain. No, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, that were my sister's copies. And she read it at her high school, but I did not read it at my high school.
Yeah,
so I
interesting.
don't know. I'm a little bit younger. Maybe it was out of the curriculum at that point. Maybe it was just one of those things. I don't really know. But I only read excerpts. I always knew like the gist of what it was about, but I never felt particularly encouraged or motivated to pick it up on my own, as I have with other kind of classics or books that I felt like I should read.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Christine, how about you?
Interesting. I had the exact same experience as Sarah, where I spent so much time reading as a kid, like would just read anything I could get my hands on, with the exception of things that I just couldn't identify with. I don't think I would have said that at the time, but
Right.
I would just gravitate towards books that I could see myself in. And yeah, like you, I don't think I ever owned a copy of Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer. And then we didn't read it at Heritage. I went to Heritage Christian School for anyone local to Indianapolis, and it was not in the curriculum at Heritage. Maybe Jenny read it. I don't know. We were in the same class.
Jenny heard me read it to her.
Oh,
Yeah.
But yeah, we would get assigned like pieces of Huckleberry Finn to read and like analyze and write an essay about. But I don't know that I ever sat down and read the entire book cover to cover. And I just didn't like see myself in Huckleberry Finn and didn't feel very drawn to it. Like even the short excerpts that we would read, I would just kind of be like, ooh, I get it. But like, this isn't something that I feel rings true to my life and
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I never read it in school.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm sure I read
Wow.
parts of it in school. I'm sure I never read it until I was an adult. And I just read it like a couple weeks ago in preparation for this show.
Wow.
But yeah, I never It was never. I think the story. I feel like I kind of knew the gist of the story.
Right.
Right. I was much more familiar with Tom Sawyer than I
Sure.
was
Right.
Huckleberry Finn.
Yep.
Huckleberry Finn seemed. I mean, I knew it was supposed to be the big book, but he, always seemed like the lesser character to me.
Right.
So, yeah, interesting.
It's weird that a room full of readers and we only have one Huckleberry Finn enthusiast. I'm glad we have one, though.
I know.
I'm glad someone here has read it.
I'm here to bring up the average. That's
Wonderful.
good.
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it.
How about Percival Everett? Who's anybody familiar with Percival Everett?
Yes, but very recently.
Yeah.
So this is kind of unusual for me, but I saw the film American
yeah.
Fiction
Right.
before reading the book Erasure.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's unusual because I don't get out to the movies that much anyway. And the one movie I've seen in a theater this year is that one.
Yeah. And you've read Erasure since?
Yes, I read it maybe a month ago.
Yeah.
2 months ago.
Yeah. What'd you think?
I loved it. I thought it was brilliant. It's satirical. It is playful. It is very aware of itself and what it's doing. And it's
Right.
got this novel within the novel,
Yeah.
which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. I just finished it this morning.
Oh my gosh!
Oh my
wow.
gosh, so
What
there
did
you
you
go.
What did
Yeah.
you think?
I thought the same thing. It's kind of amazing. And I had read The Trees a couple of years ago, which I also think is like my reaction to that was I could never hope to write anything this brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was amazing, I thought. Like brilliant and kind of important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how important Erasure is. Maybe it is
It's
for the
funny.
right audience, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And it came out, I want to say, in 2001 from a university press.
Oh, really?
And it was republished by Grey Wolf, which was his longtime publisher. But I think it's interesting too. I've read interviews where he's said he's sort of like rankled by the fact, the writer is rankled by the fact that this is his most popular book, and it's a book about what you do to sell out as a writer.
Right. Yeah. Amazing.
That's
Yeah.
ironic.
Anybody else have any familiarity with Percival Everett?
This is my first read of his work, and very, very happy to, come to know him.
Yeah. Christine?
Yeah, I feel like I was assigned one of his books in an African American lit course at college, but I don't know. I'm not 100% certain, but I feel like his work has been sort of orbiting my life for a long time, and I
Yeah.
keep being recommended. They're like picking up on recommendations of Percival Everett work, and this was the first time I actually sat down and read one. Unless I read it in college, and I just don't remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, so not a whole lot of experience.
So, all right. Well, let's talk about the book. Christine, you gave us such a nice summary. What'd you think of the book?
Wow. Well, I think it's a masterpiece. I just will say it. I think it is like among some of the best literature describing the lived American experience for Black Americans that I've ever read. Like used in the same sentence as like W.E.B. Du Bois and like Bell Hooks and Frederick Douglass. Like it is one of the most incredible things I've ever read. One of the most difficult and upsetting things I've ever read. I was struggling. I was in tears. I feel like I was having a fight or flight response. I lost my appetite reading this book. Like it was just dark and heavy and hard. But I just cannot. I don't know. I can't get over it. I can't put it into words. I think that the way that he had like such a. First of all, I think the thing that works really, really well in this book, just in a literary sense, is the fact that, like Huckleberry Finn, I think, each chapter is almost a standalone story. And I feel like in this case, he did that, but also each chapter is sort of its own lesson in, like, the lived experience of Black people in the U.S., past and present. And, like, it just kept building. And, like, each chapter could almost stand on its own, but the plot simmering on the back burner the whole time just ratcheted, like, it was so good. 5 stars, and I hardly ever give 5 stars to a book. So
Okay.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah. Sarah, what was your reaction?
I had a very similar reaction where I felt like it was a brilliant book, and it was also a really difficult book to read. And it's not the type that I think I would want to reread for, a good time, because it's hard. It's hard to it's hard to read somebody's document of inhumanity, and that's what this is. And that's why it's important. That's one of the reasons why it's important. I think one of the things that I was most struck by, too, as a writer is the use of literacy as power. Being able to read, being able to write, being able to have the materials to read and write, and to record who you are and what you think and what life was like when you lived. I mean, I think it gives me chills to think about, and how important it is to know what that's like. Even though James is a fictional character, he very much represents the lives of so many.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tim.
It was a complete paradigm shift. I feel like I know Huck so well, and I feel like I know that telling from Mark Twain so well. This was just oh my God, I have never thought of it from James' perspective, which tells you right there what I bring to the book. And one of the things I want to say early in the going here is, when it comes to understanding the racial experience in America and my white privilege and so forth, I'm a complete work in progress. And I'm only on the steps. I know some things.
Keep going, Tim.
Okay, I know some things and things I don't. But what this reminded me is, I'm just going to have to keep learning and keep going. And so it was a huge step in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're having some mic trouble here, radio listeners, so we're going to do a little bit of mic sharing. I thought it was pretty amazing, especially after reading. I may have read Huck Finn first before I read this. Like, I read them back to back, and that is a really interesting experience.
Yeah.
And I want to talk.
Are they about the same length, Ken?
Maybe Huckleberry Finn might be. It's not a long novel.
Yeah. I was surprised by how short this was. And I remember Huckleberry Finn being like, it felt to me like this, it was almost the same. Oh, you have it here.
Well,
we could count the pages.
I keep it in my pocket.
Sorry for the aside.
Well, and it also diverges.
Sure.
There's a really significant divergence from Huck Finn, and maybe we ought to talk about that. Tim, where did you see the story diverge really initially? Where was the big divergence?
Well, of course, the moment you understand that James and all of the slaves speak as they do in order to make the white folk feel comfortable.
Right.
That was like, pardon me, that's like the first indication of, okay, we're in a different world here. Well, same universe, two different worlds, and from there on, the understanding that James focus on his escape, when Huck Finn's focused on Huck's escape. And so much the comparison is to Tom Sawyer, because Tom's middle class. Tom lives in a nice house. Tom has everything he needs. Huck's living by his wits, and that's what struck me always. When I first got to know the book. Now I'm looking at James and Huck together, and it's like, oh my goodness, here's a whole other progression in an understanding of the world that I didn't even have.
Yeah.
So very, very early on. The language probably being the big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So, the language, that's obviously the first point where you go, wow, something different is going on here. It seemed like, to me, there was such a humorous tone to that. And there's such a humorous tone to erasure and such a humorous tone to the trees that I expected this to be, really pretty kind of light in tone, at least, as a satire. And then it got really dark. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think part of that, too, was the main character's realization that he could not, humor is a coping mechanism. He could not go on coping in this way, this kind of sly, okay, we know how we talk, and we know how we're going to talk in these other situations. It became something much bigger than that. It became life or death. It became being separated from your family. It became, in order to get what I want, other people have to suffer in the ways that I have suffered, which is not light.
No,
Right.
not at all.
Yeah.
No. Christine, how did you feel about that shift? Or did you feel that same kind of shift?
I felt like it went from dark to darker.
Yeah.
I never had that moment of like the light humor.
Yeah.
I actually thought there were some parts at the end of the book that were a little bit funny, like just some or not funny, but like humorous, just some one-liners. But I didn't really I was expecting it to be sort of satirical and humorous, but I was immediately bummed out.
Yeah.
It wasn't funny.
I'm with you on that. From the beginning, even when James's retelling of a classic scene at the start of Huckleberry Finn is when the boys are tying James' hat above his head while he sleeps, so that he'll think that witches did it. And I mean, it's a hilarious scene the way the Twain tells it, but to hear James tells it, it's like, okay, there's still some. As you say, yeah, he's maybe humorous in some of his words, but it's like, okay, this is not the same story here and not the same point of view.
Well, and kind of along those same lines, Tim, I was really glad that that the back part of the book was not the same as Huckleberry Finn.
Yes.
Right, the action changed.
Right.
Right, the plot points changed.
Right.
Right, that whole thing about Huck and Tom, making Jim play prisoner.
Right.
It was that would have been. I just didn't want to read that. I'm so glad that wasn't in there.
And it was two completely different journeys. They
Right.
start from the same place, but they're two different journeys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what other characters stood out in the book? Christine, anyone else stand out for you?
Yes, I thought actually there was a very nice cast of supporting characters. So the one that stands out the most, sadly, is really short. I don't even know if this character got a name, but towards the end of the book, right when they're on that final steamboat before it blows up,
Yes.
there's a slave that's just shoveling coal.
Yes, his name was Brock.
Brock, that's right. Yes. And that was just his whole existence, was just
Right.
shoveling coal. He didn't eat. It sounds like he didn't sleep. There was maybe not even an overseer, but he had just I keep thinking about him. I'm like, I don't think he's unintelligent. Like, he knows what this level of suffering is. And I think he just checked out. I can't stop thinking about that. He just, there was he probably could have stopped and jumped off and no one would. They took for granted that someone is shoveling coal to make the steamboat run.
Right.
And it was this guy.
Right.
It's crazy.
That's immediately who I thought of when Ken asked the question, was Brock. And I had to look up his name too.
Yeah.
Because I was like, the guy performing the relentless action.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Because he is so caught up in the imagination of the overseers watching him that he performs the action even when there's no punishment.
Yeah.
And that he's threatening James as well. Like,
Yeah, he made James work.
Yeah.
He's
Right.
like, if you're down here, you work.
Right.
Yeah, they got
But
him.
his whole thing was he made the boat go.
yeah.
Right.
He was dedicated to making the boat go.
And he wanted no one to take that from him.
No.
Right.
Which was the curious part about it to me. It's like, James is saying, you can escape from this. Let's do something. And And
But
I was
escape
like,
to
why?
where? For what?
Yeah.
What else is
Right.
there? I'm sure that he had lived his whole life as a slave, so he knows what else is there to escape to? Escape for what? To where? For who?
Right.
There's nothing but coal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, my palms are sweating just thinking.
I
about
know.
it. Yeah, it was crazy.
That
Yeah.
moment also felt like the Odyssey as seen through the Coen brothers. In Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Right.
Didn't he feel like one of those characters? Because
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a slyness where we're
Yeah.
just watching him like, who is this guy? And when he says, sorry. But that's what he says right before
Yeah.
the boat blows up.
Yep.
And he makes the boat blow
Yeah.
up by not paying attention to the warning signs.
Yeah.
And it's like, are we on the river Styx? Like, what is happening
Yeah.
here? You know?
It felt like that whole scene to me, that was probably my favorite scene in the book. That whole scene felt like the culmination of like an eternity of racial tension in a boiler room just ready to blow.
Perfect.
I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah,
very
it was
much.
crazy.
Yeah. Who else, Tim? Who else stood out?
The character that I was the most disappointed in was Emmett. Because when he runs into the minstrel show, it's like, oh my God, there might be somebody here who's actually going to, in my old white guy hopefulness, I'm like, okay, is this guy actually going to help? Now, you probably wouldn't know, Christopher. This
we were
is
all
doomed.
hoping. We were all hoping Emmett would help.
And so I was most disappointed, and it was like, oh, not even this is going to work.
No, and he ended up being worse almost.
Worse.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you know he was an actual historical character?
Is that right?
Really?
Yes, he
Wow.
wrote Dixie.
Wow.
No
Yes.
kidding. Okay.
Yes, all those songs in there,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
wrote those songs.
Those
Yeah.
are all real songs?
Yes, and he
Wow.
had a minstrel troupe. He might have had like the first minstrel show.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was real.
What a claim to fame.
And that was not in Huckleberry Finn, was it?
No,
Oh, no,
Okay,
no,
I was going to say no. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting thing about those songs, though, too. And as I opened the book and I see those first thing, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Do I really want to read this? But I did. Like, I read through all the lyrics. And
Yeah, right.
It sets the tone, but I'm also kind of wondering, why is that there? And by the end of the book, I realized that we are reading this book as if it is written in the journal that James is carrying, that he has stolen from
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Emmett.
sure. Yeah.
With his pencil.
Yeah.
Right,
that
exactly.
pencil. Yeah,
Exactly.
That's a good point.
Yeah, what a horrible
Yeah.
thing. I mean, that to me, that was another character who stood out, was Little George, who stole the pencil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
What a horrible fate. What
Right.
a comment on, what is important and
Yeah.
not important. How important was that pencil to Jim?
I mean, I think he knew the sacrifice he was making. I feel
I
like
think he did,
'cause he
too.
ended up dying as a result of that lynching, didn't he?
He
Yes.
did.
I think they said he passed away. I feel like he knew that he was sacrificing his whole existence so that Jim could record his own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that for a little bit. And I know, Sarah, you've mentioned it a little bit, but let's talk about why reading, but writing in particular, was so important to Jim. He said one of the first things he wrote was about his writings. He said, if they can have meaning, then life can have meaning, then I can have meaning. What does that mean to you?
Oh, that's powerful. It's funny, when I first read a book, especially when I know I'm going to talk about it, like for class or something, or for a book club or whatever, I don't take any notes in the first read, because I'm like, all right, I just want to read it through and then see what sticks in my brain and go back to it and then put in, my little Post-its or whatever. But that one, I was like, oh, Sarah, write down the page, because you need to remember that line.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole book is about meaning and about stories and who gets to tell the stories and who has the power because they have the stories. And it's also about philosophical meaning. He reads these works by Locke and Voltaire and Rousseau.
Right.
Is that the
Yeah,
third
right,
one?
yeah.
And this is really interesting to me too, that he only is able to really think about them in his dreams.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's when he's in conversation
Free
with these
enough.
people,
Yeah.
when he's free enough, it's when he's asleep.
And when
Right.
he's safe to have these thoughts and imagine even reading books safely.
Yes.
Right.
And it calls him out also. He doesn't let him get by with,
Right.
No.
Because what was he calling Locke out on? Like writing the Constitution of the state of South Carolina for pay or something like that?
And he was like, and then Locke was like, well, someone else would have done it.
Right.
Why not me?
Yeah.
I'll do less harm. Is that the answer there? I
Yes.
don't know.
Yeah. Sadly, some of us have worked in advertising, and it just hits a little too close to home.
We're in recovery, is the good news. I love the line when he's talking to Little George, and Little George discovers that he can write, and he says to James, and you can write, you need a pencil. I wish I could. What are you going to say? And they talk about, James just says, I don't know. And then Little George says, tell the story with your ears. Listen. I'll try, young George. I think the importance of paying attention, of listening to what's going on around him right now and being able to record that. And he's constantly reaching for that pencil. Just like earlier in the book, he's constantly reaching for the books that he stole. He always wants to know that power is
you're right.
accessible to him.
Yeah, very interesting. It's and Huck's reaction to him holding the books was interesting. Huck didn't see any good reason. Why would he see any good reason why a slave would want to hold on to books? And he just said they made him feel better. Yeah.
And Huck was like, okay. Jim also says at one point that he needs to write things down because without it, the weight of his thoughts is too heavy.
Yes.
And I felt that so deeply. That is I mean, we're probably all similar that like you read and think and process so much that if you don't get it out, it's good, but it feels heavy.
Yes.
So he said that he needs to record and to write and to make sense of his thoughts, which I think is so valid. And hopefully something that I think anyone who loves reading will understand. Yeah.
Yeah. What was there? I mean, we talked about the scene on the steamship toward the end of the book. What other scenes stood out? Sarah, anything stand out for you?
Oh gosh, at the very end, where there's this kind of cinematic moment in the last couple chapters when they go to, this is like total spoiler alert, but and I know we spoil things, right?
Oh, we're spoiling everything.
Okay, great. But when he goes to the breeding plantation, and he shoots the overseer, he's reunited. Well, first he's reunited with his wife and child.
Yes.
And that also feels like the Odyssey, that he's trying to get back home to his Penelope. In this case, it's Sadie. And but this moment where he just like raises his gun and shoots the overseer, and then moves on and like actually says what his name is. I thought about that a lot after I finished reading. Just that moment where, for a second, I was like, oh, this is like the Hollywood moment, where we've got the cinematic climax where the bad guy gets it in the end,
Yeah.
And I was fine with it being historically inaccurate because I wanted it to happen.
Right.
We'll give it a pass.
Yeah.
That's right. It's a pass for me.
I felt like there were a lot of those scenes at the end of the book that were just like the scene with Judge Thatcher,
Yes.
the scene where he murders the overseer, the scene, the rape scene, all of those bang, 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 right at the end of the book. Wow, really vivid.
It felt like once the boiler room blew up, every chapter blew up. Like every chapter just hit so hard after that boiler room.
And it's such a contrast. In the end, in Huckleberry Finn, again, Tom is middle class, so and he's going to play this game with Huck that they're going to pretend to set Jim free because Tom wants adventures that Huck lives every day. That's what Tom wishes he was doing, and so they concoct this whole thing. It's actually terribly tedious, and it's funny, and James is just kind of a toy. But in this case, this is life. I mean, and Everett really says, let's get real here. What would that have been like? What would trying to get your freedom be like? And what would the cost of that have been? And what would James have had to be? He murders 2 people at least, and all in an attempt to free his family and others. And it's sort of like, okay, it's sort of like, all right, let's. This isn't a comfort read,
Did he kill Judge Thatcher?
He did not kill Judge Thatcher.
Okay.
He left him tied to a tree, I think.
There's another guy he chokes to death, doesn't he?
Well, that was the overseer who raped the woman who was living in his house then.
And then he shoots the other guy.
Right.
Yeah. So the contrast between the fun and games that the white boys are having and the reality that James is living in.
Yeah.
And as a white guy, I've never seen that. Even though I'm annoyed at the end of Huckleberry Finn, it's sort of like, does Tom have to come back and coerce Huck into all this silliness? And it's sort of like, there's almost the contrast makes the point, though.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my goodness.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, Tim, I mean, you've apologized for your white guyness several times now.
Sorry.
But no. I mean, I get it.
But you can't read this book without being aware of it.
I'm very aware of it.
Yeah.
But I just want to say for the room and for the audience, I mean, you also were working on a documentary film where you interviewed Cornel West and his best friend.
I've tried to take steps.
Right.
Yeah,
you have tried.
Right,
you have tried to take,
Right.
you've actually tried to take steps.
Yeah. True.
And I know that you were particularly moved by Huck's declaration
Yes.
that he was going to stay with Jim.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Okay, then I'll go to hell.
Right.
Is what he says, because he's writing the note out. Again, writing is the thing. He's writing the note out. Mrs. Watson, the slave is down here, and they'll send for him, or they'll send him back if you send money. Yeah. And he says, I'm in a tight spot. He's pacing back and forth on the raft, and Jim's asleep. And finally, he tears the note up and says, well, then I'll just go to hell.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
it's like... It's like
And I know you also pointed out in the acknowledgments, his final acknowledgement was finally a nod to Mark Twain. His humor and humanity affected me long before I became a writer. Heaven for the climate, hell for my long-awaited lunch with Mark Twain.
Isn't that great?
Yeah. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
took that home.
But I want to know, did this in any way change your view of Huckleberry Finn?
No, because that's two different journeys.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and that's why I still stand by Huck Finn. It was a progressive piece for Twain to have written at the time, when these two characters become best friends, care for each other, look out for each other. And Huck's understanding, again, he kind of like James in this book. James has a real world understanding that Huck in the novel James doesn't have. In Huckleberry Finn, Huck has a real world understanding that Tom Sawyer doesn't even know exists. And it's his that moral development and that moral realization that comes to him, and he's willing to take that stand. I think that's timeless. You know.
Yeah. Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think context is everything, right? Like the context that you read it in, the context it was written in, and understanding, that texts are a product of their time and of the writers, too. And, here's a little interesting bit of context, too. When, Ken, you had asked us earlier via email what our experience was of Huck Finn and reading it, I was like, I'm sure I have a copy in the house. And I had two. I had one that was 4 novels in one. That was one of them. And then another, I had, I'm going to sound like a hoarder, but I have a Norton anthology from 1989, as one does. And it has the entire... Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in it, and it has an excerpt, and it's one of those fat, couple thousand pages, like the tissue paper thin.
It's Norton anthology.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
And 1989, right, product of its time. It has W.E.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk, but only an excerpt.
Ooh.
Only an excerpt.
Yeah.
That could have been included in its entirety, too. And so,
You've got 3,000 pages, Norton.
Right, but this is some of our lifetime, right? Just sort of understanding that we are not that far from this past.
No, this just happened.
You know?
This just happened.
Exactly.
And we want to put it behind us because it's horrific. But if we don't acknowledge it, then we can't. And I kept thinking of, I don't know if anyone here has read Zora Neale Hurston. She wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Sure.
Yeah. And more recently, she's been gone for a long time, but a book was published posthumously called Barracoon. And she interviewed one of the last living slaves in the 20s. He was living in Alabama. And he was one of the last living slaves who had come over on the final slave ship.
Right.
And I can't, I've got it with me, but Barracoon refers to the cages that they were kept in before they were put on the ships. But anyway, she's somebody who was an anthropologist and a beautiful writer, fiction writer. But this quote just kind of rings in my ears all the time. She said, "If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it."
Oh my.
Dang.
So, like perspective, right?
Yeah.
We have
Right.
to have the
Right.
perspectives of others. We have to be able to imaginatively understand who other people are.
Yeah.
And like that's the thing that struck me the most
Yeah.
at the end of this book is we had, as you put it, just like everything blowing up, after the boiler room blew up.
Sure.
Everything blew up. You're absolutely right. And I think it was his realization that he could not ask for equality because it would not be given. He had to take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the
Right.
way he could
Yep.
be equal was to be violent.
Yeah.
Right.
And to write it
Which
down.
is-
And to
record
write-
his
yes.
pain.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
And to your point earlier about the timeliness of it all, one of the commentators on Huck Finn talks about how there's a repeated pattern of life goes to farce, goes to horror. And when Huck gets off the raft and he ends up with the Grangerfords and the Shepherdsons, and at first it's life, and then it's kind of a farce. The Shepherdsons are, rather the Grangerfords that he lives with, live in such a genteel manner, and then it goes to horror in the feud between the two families where, a dozen members each side are slaughtered. And that kind of repeats itself through Huck Finn. They end up in these situations where Colonel Sherborne ends up shooting the drunk Boggs because he has been mocking him in the middle of the street, and then it's actually Twain mouthing off and daring anybody to challenge him for doing so. And again, it goes, life goes to farce, goes to horror.
Yeah.
Boggs is a farce; he's silly.
Yeah.
But then then Colonel Sherborne shoots him dead, and it's like, how do we see that today? Well, you don't have to look very far,
Tim, I would sign up for your Mark Twain course.
I would
so
too.
serious. I've
know.
never heard anyone speak so compellingly about Mark Twain. Honestly, I'm
it's
so
a different
intrigued.
story. It's your show, Ken.
Mark Twain 101.
No.
Yeah. What's the next show?
It's our show. So let's talk about the ultimate spoiler. What about the revelation that Huck is Jim's son? Christine?
So I am going to be honest. I didn't pick up this book and read it until yesterday.
That's okay. It's fresh in your mind.
Awesome.
It's fresh in your mind.
I wasn't ready to I knew that this was going to be difficult
Such a
and
much
maybe a little
faster
bit
read.
traumatizing.
Yeah.
So I put it off forever and ever. And then Sunday I tried to start it and took a 3-hour nap. So anyways, I pretty much read the whole thing yesterday. So I had seen the question, so I knew the spoiler already.
Yeah.
And there's actually a lot of hints throughout the book
Yes.
that
Right.
that Huck is his son.
Right.
I don't know how believable it is, but I don't think it needs to be believable to make the point. I think the point is Huck was one of my favorite characters in the book, mostly because he is a kid in a abusive, unsafe home environment, which there's no comparing, the troubles of slavery to abuse, but it's a pretty similar situation where Jim has never felt safe in the world. Huck has never felt safe in the world. And so
Right.
I thought that they immediately had a bond and sort of saw and understood each other on that level.
Right.
And then the hints dropped throughout in the way that Jim was protective and careful of Huck and his well-being. I thought it made so much sense for this book, even if it doesn't make logical sense, even if the Mark Twain historians hate it. I really liked it.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much that influenced Huck's decision to quote unquote go to hell with Jim and sort of see this journey through to the end. If, he finally felt like he had a safe parental figure in the world. I loved it. I really liked it. I think in so many cases it wouldn't have worked. And when I read the question, I was like, oh, that's such a cheesy reveal. And then I ended up really liking it.
Yeah.
And I totally buy it for this narrative.
That's interesting. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What'd you think, Tim?
I didn't buy it at first. I was like, wait a minute. But when you realize they really are, the books narrate two different journeys. And on this journey, on James's journey as he sees it, and he tells it, yes, that makes complete sense. Why else would this man, who is strong and resourceful and quick on his feet and powerful, why is he going to tie his fate with this young boy who he knows, he knows he's his son, but he also knows he's white enough that he's accepted in the white community. He's safe already. And it's like, okay, understanding it from this point of view, That makes sense.
It almost felt like James comes to realize it along with us. Like that there are some moments where he might be in denial too, because I forget who it is, but somebody asks him, like, does he know?
Yeah.
Or something to that effect. And he's like, know what? And he's either playing dumb or he actually has not admitted to himself that Huck is his son.
Yeah.
Right? And then he eventually gets to the point, because, he's relieved several times when he's free of the kid, because he's like, okay,
Right.
Right.
I can move freely, I can do this,
Yeah.
but he also saves him. He
Yeah.
makes the choice in the river,
Yeah.
like
To
they're
say,
two
I feel
people.
like when he first sort of like came alongside Norman and they formulated a pretty terrible plan.
It was a bad plan.
In retrospect, not a great plan.
It did not work out
But
great.
you have to try.
I think it's true.
But it was when he was with Norman that he kept expressing, I'm so happy to be free of Huck. I'm so happy to be free of Huck. And then the second he had the choice of who to save, saves Huck.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Well, there was a lot of interesting passing in the book, too.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh my gosh.
Norman was
so much.
passing.
Yes.
Huck was Jim's
Huck
son.
dressed up as a girl, too.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And also,
There was Sammy.
there was Sammy, who
Sammy.
we didn't
Sammy.
know was a girl.
Yep.
Right.
And Jim put on blackface
Jim,
to
like,
pretend he was
Yes.
a
That
white
was
guy doing blackface.
Crazy.
Yes.
That actually made me laugh out
Yeah.
loud.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was the
Yeah.
one moment where I laughed out loud.
Well, the absurdity
Crazy.
of what it takes
Crazy.
in order for him to feel safe, in order for him to be safe.
Right.
That's the point that comes back again and again. They're both looking for safety, as you said, Sarah. I mean, they're both trying to find what that is.
Yeah. And for Jim to feel safe, he has to make the white people around him feel safe. Really.
Right.
His safety
Right.
depends on
Right.
the white people in charge of him, or even just in his vicinity feeling safe, with him being there
Yeah.
and him being black.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and not only that, he needed to have a white person with him
Right.
to travel safely, even.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Yep.
He came to he tried to get Huck to go away until he came to the conclusion that he was safer. The only way he could
With a
make
white
it where he was
person.
going
Yeah.
was
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
with Huck.
I wrote down something like, because that was one of the thought starter questions that you sent, and I wrote down something like, well, that helps to validate or vouch for your experience, and you were like, sort of, I deserve to be here because X, Y, or Z. And I thought, like, okay, well, this is something that even I have felt just in central Indiana. And then I think James literally wrote something almost like exactly what I'd written. Or it's almost like a lot of times you almost have to have like a reason to validate your existence in a particular space, and the easiest way to do that is to tie yourself to a white person.
Right. So, Christine,
Yeah.
what else do you think in the book here parallels things that you have dealt with today?
So definitely the speech. For anyone listening, I'm black. I don't know. So the biggest thing is actually the speech. I have so many thoughts and feelings about this, but I grew up, I went to a private schools, like 90% white, maybe more. My parents were very, 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 very honest about grammar and speech and diction. I think they wanted us to sound white on the phone. I think they literally said that to me. It was like, if you pick up the phone for an interview, we don't want someone to know that you're black. Which it's like, as a kid, you're just like, okay, whatever. But, it takes a long time to realize, why do I have to pretend and hide
Right.
to be something else?
Right.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it's just like it might not be exhausting to pass as something
Yeah.
once or twice, but to wake up and do this day after day after day after day after day in every single setting is
Yeah.
exhausting.
Right.
And Norman says that too. Norman said something that was like, I think he just said, I can pass for white, but it's exhausting.
Yeah.
I can do
Yes.
it, but I'm tired.
Right.
Yes.
I'm
Right.
tired. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that rang very true. It is just, it's hard. It's hard to, sort of have this burden that, like, wherever you go, you have to prove, even something as simple as, like, I remember going to a brewery and thinking to myself, like, I loved craft beer back when the big brewery boom was happening, and I remember spending a lot of time studying about craft beer so that I could walk into a brewery and feel comfortable ordering whatever Imperial IPA,
Yeah.
because it's
Right.
just like, are there any other black women at this brewery ordering just this,
Right.
it comes down to every single thing from that to, like, I remember in an AP English class, my teacher told me I was in the wrong place.
Oh my.
Oh my gosh.
So it's everything from, like, my literal education to just ordering a beer. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
And then work, and then you know, enter the workforce, and that's a whole other thing. And yeah, this rang very true. It is probably one of the, again, alongside, like I said in the beginning, alongside W.E.B. Du Bois and Bell Hooks, it's the truest. Bell Hooks probably more so because there's the added sort of quote unquote disadvantage of being a woman as well.
Right.
But yeah, it just rings very true for the experience. Just hasn't really changed all that much. It's less aggressive. It's more about microaggressions, but it's still the same.
Huh.
Yeah.
Microaggressions build up.
You're telling me.
Death by a thousand
Yeah.
cuts. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sorry, I kept seeing it promoted, Snoop Dogg with Martha Stewart at the Olympics. Okay, someone's attached to someone here and they're
No.
safe.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like,
Yeah.
okay, do we
So-
really have to make this person's
I feel
appear
like
safer?
I feel like Snoop Dogg has just gotten the stamp of approval from white people.
He is.
He was
Yeah.
like
Right.
back in the 90s, like
Right.
his stuff was wild. And all
Yes.
the white people
Right.
are like, we love Snoop Dogg. And
Yes.
it's
It's
like,
like,
okay, how do I
Do
make money
you-
off of this?
do you-
Oh my
Do you
gosh,
love,
yeah,
do you
but
love
do you?
Snoop
Yeah.
from the 90s?
They don't
Yeah.
know. They don't know.
They
They're
don't
just like,
know.
here's a nice, safe black man. That's how
Right.
I see
And
it.
the network.
Right.
That's how I see it.
Singing
He's a
Yeah.
black man
children's.
who all the white people can
Yeah.
just feel okay
And
about.
he's funny, but he is so smart. He does
Yeah.
the same voice thing.
Yeah.
He
Right.
can sound so many different ways in any
can.
venue. He knows exactly what he's
Right.
doing.
Yeah.
I love Snoop Dogg for what it's worth.
So it's like multiple channel code switching.
yeah, he is code switching so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But honestly, good for him. I
Sure.
like Snoop.
I do too.
He's great.
Yeah.
He's the best part of the
It's
Olympics
entertaining.
right now.
Yeah, right.
He's
Very
hard to
entertaining.
dislike.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's, we've talked about, a lot of the stuff at the end of the book, but let's just talk about the ending. What do we think about the ending? Tim, what'd you think about the ending?
I thought, well, how else could it end? I thought, well, yeah, that's how this ends. And his triumphant statement of his own name.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, yeah. So this is his journey, his odyssey, and he's become himself.
Yeah.
In that way. So I did, yeah. Again, at that point, we have so left Huckleberry Finn. We've so left that as the model for the book that this is his story and his freedom that we're talking about. So.
Yeah. Sarah, how about you? What'd you think?
I agree with what Tim said about the naming, and I think it's a really interesting place to end because if this is something that we are reading that he has written by hand with his pencil in Emmett's songbook, why does it end there? What happens to him next?
Right.
Yeah.
Like it sort of leaves
Wow.
that question in mind that
Wow, it really does, doesn't it?
if that's where it ends, where does
But
it
yet
go
you
for
kind
him?
of know. You kind of know it's not going to get easier. It's
No.
not going to be happy.
But he says something like, "Some of us are going to die. Some of
Yes,
us are,
right.
some of us will
And
get
some
away.
of us will make it.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Christine, how'd it land for you?
I loved the ending. I loved it. I was kind of just happy it was over.
Yeah.
Like at that point, I'd gotten hot. Like I was
Yeah.
just like so. It was the boiler room scene. I broke a sweat. I
Yeah.
felt the boiler. So I was like sitting on my floor with a book light, like huddled over this book.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I was just checking to make sure I remember it correctly, but in the end, he lets like a plantation burn, right?
Right.
And says nothing.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of that lesson he's giving to the kids, essentially about how to code switch. So he's like, what if you see that there's a grease fire? What do you say? And they
Right.
didn't get the grammar correct, and they didn't get, the slave talk correct, so they had to redo it. And instead, it ended with him just letting the place burn. I loved it.
So
I
smart.
loved
Yeah.
this
Yeah,
ending.
I'm
And
sure
it
you
felt
did.
so
Yeah.
cinematic.
course.
Like
Yeah.
Sarah said. Felt so cinematic. Yeah.
Well, I'm not even going to go around and ask if we would recommend it because I think we would all recommend this
Oh,
book. Is
yes.
that
Yeah.
fair to say?
Thumbs up
Yeah, this
all
is
around.
unanimous.
I just
Yeah.
really hope that Percival Everett hears this sometime and understands that all of us had physical reactions to this
Yeah.
book. Like we were sweating in the
Yeah.
boiler room. We
Yeah,
had
it was
chills.
really hard to read.
Yeah.
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 That's
very much.
powerful. That's
Yeah.
a powerful writer.
Yep.
Very
Yeah,
much.
no kidding. Yeah. So let's, we got a little bit of time left. Who has a recommendation for something else that's good out there? Tim Taylor, you
Well,
got something?
I was going to say, if you have not read Huckleberry Finn as an adult, of course I would start there. If you want some other Twain, go to any collection of his short stories. Be sure and get one that includes The Mysterious Stranger and The Man Who Corrupted Hadleyburg, I think is the name of the town. Those two are probably his greatest statement on the human condition, and in particular, as it relates to religion. And don't bother with the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County. You can skip that one.
All right. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you, Tim. Christine.
Yeah, so I would recommend, as I've mentioned throughout the show, I would definitely recommend W.E.B. Du Bois, The Souls of Black Folk. I think it's one of the best pieces of literature that exists in written form. It is so good. Along with Bell Hooks' Anti-Woman, which is a very, very interesting book about it's basically just intersectional feminism. So for Black women, do you identify as Black or woman? It's both, right? Because anyways, it's a whole thing. Really, really good book.
Is that a thing today?
Yeah, it is a whole other
in
discussion.
the news where that's been a
Lord.
Wow.
Really, really good. And also Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass by Frederick Douglass. Really gritty and raw, but I think a really important book that probably not enough people read. And then just in terms of something I've been reading lately, I've been super into short stories this year. I'm actually really excited about your book.
Oh, thanks.
So I just read a book called Table for Two by Amor Tolls. I've never read any of his work. People have talked about him, and I have several of his books on my shelf.
Yeah.
But they're all like 600 pages. And I was like, I've got a long list of books to read. And before I commit, let me see if I like this guy. So he just published a book of short stories and a novella. So it's like 4 short stories and a novella called A Table for Two. It was so good.
Yeah.
It was so good. I absolutely loved it. Just came out this year.
Awesome. Great recommendations. Sarah Layden, you got something?
Yes, I do. These are all great recs. I'm going to write them down too so I can add them to my growing hoarder stack of books at home. I mentioned Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston. I would include that. I would also include Kindred by Octavia Butler.
Yes.
Great book.
Oh, so good.
And I guess it's a show. I have not seen the show. Right?
I didn't watch it either.
Okay.
I was still traumatized from the book.
The book is pretty traumatizing, and it's interesting. I mean, it came out in the 70s, right? And
I think so, yeah.
And it employs like portal, time travel type stuff in order to explain like how can we bring these worlds together and try to understand them. And it's brutal.
Yeah.
But it's also a great fast-paced read. And I would also recommend an Irish writer. Her name's Claire Keegan. And she's written a couple of novellas and a book of 3 short stories called So Late in the Day.
Awesome.
And I'm going to teach that this fall. I'm really excited
excellent.
about
Great.
that.
I'll be in your class.
Yeah,
cool.
come take it.
Yeah, cool.
We're going to take Tim's class, and what are you going to teach, Christine and Ken?
I don't know.
Well, I'm going to reveal, I'm going to go the opposite direction. I'm going to reveal some holes in my reading experience. So a couple months ago, I admitted that one big hole that my friend Tim Taylor filled was I'd never read anything by John le Carré, and Tim gave me a copy of The Spy Who Came In From the Cold for my birthday. And what a great book that is. I have many other holes
Make me happy.
in my reading. So, and another one is our friend and club member Susan Neville. Almost every time she's here, she mentions Iris Murdoch.
Yes.
And I have never read Iris Murdoch. And I thought, so I have to read some Iris Murdoch. And I just picked up The Black Prince, which was her 15th novel.
Yeah.
And it is a delight. It is hilarious. It's actually, The Black Prince is actually a book in The Black Prince, written by this guy named Bradley Pearson. He's an unsuccessful author. And he has these increasingly weird and volatile escapades involving an arch rival and the rival's wife and daughter and his ex-wife and others. It's bookended. The novel is bookended by a foreword and afterwards by other characters in the novel.
I love it.
Giving a different perspective of, it is great. You know, Hamlet is a recurring theme in the book. The very phallic BT Tower in London is a recurring image in the book, which may give you some clues as to what's going on with our narrator and how reliable he is.
Oh, my gosh.
But it's hilarious. And she wrote 26 novels, so I have some catching up to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And Yeah, that's all for us. You can find notes for this and all our shows, the Radio Free Book Club blog on medium.com. Please consider following us and drop us a note on Facebook. Stream the show wherever you listen to podcasts. We're always interested to hear what you think about the book and the show. For Sarah Layden, Tim Taylor, Christine Hudson, our engineer Galileo, and all the members of Radio Free Book Club, I'm Ken Honeywell. Thanks for listening, and join us next month when we'll be doing some time traveling again. This time with Kayleen Bradley's The Ministry of Time. We hope you'll join us. Till then, read a book.